I'll be there Monday. I have to drop off books at the library. And then that's it. I know. I've seen you there. It's good.
Good morning and welcome to the Sunday service. This morning we will meditate few minutes. After the meditation we have a Dhamma talks. So right now Subodha is going to lead the meditation.
Let's get into a comfortable position. Close our eyes. And begin with 3 long, deep breaths. And now let's develop thoughts of goodwill, loving kindness, metta, beginning with ourselves. We are cultivating a sincere wish, a wholesome desire for our true and lasting happiness. We might think to ourselves, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May I live with a heart and mind unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May I look after myself with ease. And then extend your goodwill, your loving kindness to your friends, your family, your guides and mentors, all those close to your hearts, all those that you respect and admire. May they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And then we extend our goodwill to our acquaintances, those that we don't know so well. May they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And then we extend our goodwill, our loving kindness to those that we don't get along with so well, those that we have difficulty respecting or admiring. even those that may call us enemy. May they also be happy, peaceful, free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May they also live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May they look after themselves with ease. And so it is in this spirit of admirable friendship with all beings that we extend our goodwill in all directions, to the north, to the east, to the south, to the west, above and below, outward into infinity, to all sentient beings everywhere. May we all be happy. May we all be peaceful. May we all be free from stress and pain, free from suffering. May we all live with hearts and minds unburdened by greed, by aversion, by delusion. May we all look after ourselves with ease. And now, with our hearts and minds uplifted with the metta that we have cultivated, let us now turn our attention to the breath. Ardent, alert, mindful, setting aside greed and distress with reference to the world. We bring our attention to the breath as it comes in, the breath as it goes out. Become mindful of the quality of the breathing, the quality of the breath. Is the breath long, short, deep, shallow? Wherever it is in the body that you feel the breath most easily, bring your attention there and become familiar with the kind of breathing happening right now. It can be helpful in establishing our mindfulness of breathing to ask ourselves what kind of breathing would be the most easeful right now. And then become very observant, watching how the body responds to this prompting. See how the body eases into the breath, how the mind settles on its object of meditation. Allow yourself to become established in the breath, bathed in the breath. Whatever thoughts of the past, whatever thoughts of the future, whatever fantasies that might come into the mind, set them aside and return yourself to the breath. The breath coming in, the breath going out. Establish your awareness there and see if you can maintain it. Every time the mind wanders, bring it back. Let us develop this mindfulness of breathing for the remainder of this session. Continue to meditate in this way until you hear the bell.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Steven Subodha, leading the meditation. Right now, Subodha is going to give a Dhamma talk. He's a long-time member of our temple and giving Dhamma talk almost, I don't know how many years, 10 years? 5?
A long time now.
Oh, yes. So we really appreciate you about your help for the center. So you can start your Dhamma talk right now.
Thank you, Bhante. I pay homage to the Buddha. I pay homage to the Dhamma. I pay homage to the Sangha. On Friday, I paid a visit to Vroman's over in Pasadena. I don't know if you're familiar with that bookstore. I've been going there for a really long time. It's one of the few bookstores left, it feels like, an actual brick and mortar shop. And I was walking around there, kind of killing time, actually. My wife and I share a car, and she had some business in Pasadena that she had to attend to, and so I dropped her off and used it as an excuse to have lunch at Earth Cafe, and then walked over to Vroman's. And I eventually found myself into the little coffee shop they have out front, bought myself a hot drink, and sat down. Outside they have a little seating area, not many tables, not many chairs, but there was a quiet spot. There was a gentleman sitting there quietly, and I sat down next to him. And I was just contemplating my warm drink when this older woman and her adult daughter were walking down the sidewalk, and they saw all of us sitting at the coffee shop in front of Vroman's, and she said, "Look at that, sweetheart, they're all drinking their peppermint mochas," and just kept on walking with a big smile on her face. And after she passed by, I said out loud, not necessarily to the man next to me, but just sort of out loud, and if he happened to participate, fine. And I said, "The hell I am, I'm drinking chamomile." And at the moment I said that, he stiffened, was quiet, and sat there for a few minutes, and then got up and walked away. And then I thought to myself, man, I must have broken some silent agreement we had to not talk to each other at all. He was quietly sitting there, and I came in, and I quietly sat there, and we had some thing going on, and I ruined it. But then I thought about it further, and I thought, the thing is, maybe he hadn't heard that woman, which is even weirder, because that means it was completely silent, and then out of nowhere I said, "The hell I am, I'm drinking chamomile." And he's just like, "Who is this guy? What's wrong with him?" And he got up and walked away. I don't really know why. But it was one of those weird situations where you don't really know in that situation who's listening and who's not. I don't know what he heard, right? And no one knew what I heard, I guess, either. And indirectly, it reminds me of a story I read recently. In fact, that very same day in the morning. Ever since I was little, I've loved to be immersed in story. I loved reading as a child, and it's something I've tried carrying over into my adulthood with greater and lesser success. I'll admit that these days I tend to read more nonfiction than I read fiction. So when I happen to find something that's fiction and also in my interests, I get really excited. And on my bookcase for a long time, I've had a little anthology of Buddhist fiction. And I thought, ooh, this will be a fun read. Many years ago, and then I got busy with a lot of scholastic stuff, and I didn't get a chance to read it. But now, as the semester is winding down, I found myself with some free time, and so sure enough, I got to pick up that book and read some of the stories. They're all short stories in this anthology. And each one in some way has some Buddhism in it, supposedly. I don't know. I haven't finished the book yet. But that morning I did read a story in there that was very interesting about an old man from Vietnam who finds his way to eventually living in New Orleans in the United States. And when the story takes place, he's of very advanced years. He's almost 100. He's now in poor health. His daughter and his other children are taking care of him now, and even his eldest daughter is already in her 60s or 70s or so, because that's how long he's been alive, that even his children are older now and he's got grandkids and everything. And he's participating now in this tradition that he's older and he's approaching death, everyone assumes, of people coming by to pay their respects and have their last words with him while he's still well enough to have a conversation before things get too bad. And so he's in his comfy room where he has his comfy bed and he has this big comfy chair, what he calls an oversized chair, and he sits in it. And he sits in his oversized chair as people come, and he greets them all and they have conversations. And in the story he talks about those that he likes and those that he dislikes. He likes all the friendly people who are there for good, honest reasons. And then he says that he really dislikes those who he feels are dishonest or of like low character and everything. And he says in the story that sometimes when these people come, and especially the ones that he doesn't like all that well, he sits in his chair and just pretends to doze off because he's an old man. Who's going to think otherwise? You have an old man close his eyes, you just assume he's napping. Or you assume he's dead, but in this case, napping. And so he sits in his chair one day as his son-in-law and his grandson are visiting. And he doesn't really care for the conversation, and certainly doesn't care for his son-in-law. So he sits there and he starts sitting, he just closes his eyes gently, and at first he just has his eyes halfway open, half closed, and then eventually just fully closed. And as he's sitting there, his son-in-law and his grandson start to feel free to say the stuff they might not otherwise say if Grandpa was awake. And then they reveal something quite troubling. They reveal that a certain weapon has been disposed of. And this gets the attention of Grandpa, who's pretending to be asleep, because he starts thinking, well, what are they talking about? And he remembers that earlier that day he had read about a friend of his who had been gunned down while driving in his truck. He had a friend who was especially active in the community of Vietnamese diaspora in the area and was involved in local politics and everything. And this guy had become a true American New Orleans citizen through and through. He was driving his Ford pickup truck and everything, doing the good American stuff. And he had shared some thoughts he had on Vietnam and the government there, and sure enough, someone who thought differently decided to shoot him dead. And he was sad to hear of this, but then as he's sitting there with his eyes closed, son-in-law and grandson are like, yeah, they didn't find the weapon, the weapon, yeah, it's gone, and like clearly indicating that somehow they're involved in this conspiracy. And Grandpa eventually puts two and two together that his grandson very likely killed this man. And, the story, even though that's part of it, is not mostly about that. In fact, there's all sorts of other stuff that happens. But, after reading that story, I felt a lot like that old man, let's say, sitting there with eyes half closed and seeing and hearing people talk about things that they probably shouldn't say. And, of course, I'm referring to some stuff that I've seen online recently where let's say similar events have happened. Someone was gunned down, and I've been quite surprised at the sort of glee and delight I've seen towards it online. And, it's bad enough when it's strangers who have those views. Another thing entirely when it's, friends and family who seem to be taking delight in someone's passing, someone's death. And so, I know that this is a very tough topic. I'm not even quite sure how to approach it. I just feel that it needs to be approached. How seriously we take nonviolence in Buddhism. And so I'm by no means the old man sitting in his chair, because I'm not 100, not even by a long shot. But I am the kind of person that sits around and listens. And what I listen to, what I seem to be hearing a lot, are so many people today in our society who are clearly very aggrieved. They're very mad, they're very angry, they're very hurt. And they've allowed that anger and hurt to spill over into ill will. And I think the troubling thing is the kind of jokey nature that takes, where people are feeling as if that this thing that has happened is a good thing and it's a unifying thing, that somehow people of different views are going to be unified over the death of someone, the violent death of someone. When things like this happen in the world, I like to reflect on my own conduct. That's really all I can do. I'm in no position to fix the world. No one can. But when these kind of things happen, I think about myself, and I think about the kind of qualities I'm trying to cultivate. And so, when we start these sessions every Sunday, these days we tend to start with developing goodwill. We develop loving kindness. And it's something that we develop inside for ourselves. And in doing so, I like to think, so that we can spread that around. One of the things that I said last week, as I was in discussion with Silas, was the idea that we develop this peace in us so that we have peace to give. And it's the same thing with goodwill, that we develop goodwill in ourselves, for ourselves, so that we also have goodwill to give others. Which isn't to say that we live a life of loving every single person we meet, every single person we know, and all the people out there we don't know. It's not about love. That's actually why I try not to use loving kindness. I use it because people know the word. I like to use goodwill, because you don't even have to like the people you have goodwill for. You just have to not wish them any harm. You have to wish them well-being, and that's it. Recently, or I should say now, it's been a few months, I got an email from someone who made the choice to stop practicing with myself and my teacher. And she gave a couple of reasons, but one of the reasons that she gave was that she said that she, her whole life, had struggled with arachnophobia. She hated spiders, hated them, feared and reviled them, to such a degree that she felt that she could never at any point in this life get away from killing a spider or encouraging someone else to kill a spider. And that was big enough that she's like, well, can't be a Buddhist now. Spiders got to die, right? And I think about how small and insignificant and quiet, humble really, the little spider is. Most spiders I've met, even the supposedly deadly ones, oftentimes are just minding their own business. They're in the corner of the room, maybe up in the ceiling, maybe under some dusty cupboards or something. They're just kind of there doing their own thing, oftentimes helping out. Little critters in the house, they just kind of munch on them. No big deal, right? And I can't even imagine hating a spider and really, really wanting that spider, good and dead. But oftentimes, for most of us in day-to-day life, it isn't so much that we hate the spider. It's that we just think it's nasty, it's gross, or that it's dangerous. A lot of us, especially here in the West, were encouraged growing up to kill spiders. I know I was. My dad would make a game out of all the spiders and the moths we could kill in the house. My dad was gross. He wouldn't even get a paper towel. He'd kind of mush that with his bare hand and go, look, see? I'm like, okay, cool, thanks, Dad. Gross, wash your hands. But he'd like to be like Mr. Miyagi with the chopsticks trying to catch the fly, but with moths in his hands. Like, I got another one. Like, that's something that we have. We make little games out of this stuff. And so as Buddhists, when we start cultivating goodwill, non-ill will, and we take seriously the precept against killing, taking life, even small lives, then we find ourselves sometimes inconvenienced. You might find yourself like me, pulling over in a 7-Eleven parking lot because you realize there's a spider in your car, and then you grab it by a thread of its spider silk to run out and put it outside, and it starts crawling up the silk as you're going. You're like, ah! and trying to find a bush to put the little spider in. You might do things like that. My wife and I, in our own home, have a different game. Every time we find a little bug or a spider, we delicately, gently escort it outside. You know, we'll find a little piece of paper or a little cup or whatever. If it's not too dangerous, we'll even let it crawl in our hand and take it outside somewhere in the garden and let it off, right? I think a much more rewarding game that we get to play, trying to help keep these things alive, but notice, not necessarily nearby, right? There's this tendency to think that when we're developing goodwill, loving kindness, that it means proximity, right? You can have loving kindness for the polar bear. It doesn't mean you got to go hug it. You can perfectly say, I have goodwill for the polar bear from right over here, right? You don't need to be close by to the things you have goodwill for, because you don't have to like them, you don't have to be close to them, you don't have to love them. You just have to not wish them any harm. And so it was quite disheartening to see this person decide for themselves that this arachnophobia meant the death of spiders. The thing is, there are many things in life that could potentially scare us, anger us, repulse us, but it doesn't have to turn into ill will. We can just have those feelings and find other ways of doing something about those feelings. I don't particularly like spiders. I just don't hate them, but I also don't wish them any ill will. I just don't want them to be near me. My wife actually kind of likes spiders. She's the type that she'd probably be cool having a tarantula in the house as a pet. I could never. Every time I've been near one of those creepy little guys, I've never wanted to hold one. They're like, here, you want to hold a tarantula? No, thank you, right? You be fine over there, tarantula. All the goodwill for you. Over there. Bye-bye, tarantula. Maybe next time. Maybe next life. I don't know. But you have to think about it this way. The humble spider, if you can have ill will for that, man, how could you possibly develop strong goodwill for a human if you're already after the poor, humble spider, right? No spider out there is a billionaire CEO, you know? So one of the things that we can reflect on is the role that anger plays in our lives. You'll notice that when I do our loving kindness meditation, our goodwill meditation, our metta meditation, I talk about greed, and I talk about aversion, and I talk about delusion. One time someone asked me why I used the word aversion for a word that means, to some people, anger, right? That's one of the translations we have for this term. And I said, well, you know, the problem with listing anger is that anger in itself is not a problem. Anger, the way it manifests for a lot of us, if you really think about the things that make you angry, they often come down many times to a sense of injustice, a sense of unfairness, a sense of something going wrong that you wanted to go right. And that in itself is not the problem. It's when anger becomes ill will that's the problem. Anger turned into ill will now means, well, I feel this way and now it's going to be your problem, come what may. And that's the part that we need to worry about. So aversion, in many ways, is ill will. We can think of them as very synonymous, certainly overlapping, which is something that we're looking to work against, train ourselves against, by training the opposite. We see ill will in our hearts, we develop goodwill as a way of counteracting it. And it can be really helpful to start with the small things. I know it seems silly to talk about the spider, the ant, the cricket, and so on. But in really, really trying to keep these things alive and allowing yourself to be inconvenienced in that way, in the way I certainly have at times, it helps us realize how rewarding it can be to live a life that way, to truly have no ill will for anyone in the world. Which is not to say that we are all of a sudden cool with all the things that people do. When we do our loving kindness meditation, we even send loving kindness to those as I say, we don't necessarily like. We don't necessarily get along with. We don't necessarily respect or admire these people. These are people that may very well have something against us. They might call us enemy. And even in those moments, the Buddha tells us, develop goodwill towards them. One of the most, I think, powerful examples of this is the Buddha encouraging loving kindness, goodwill, even in those moments where, say, people are grabbing you, throwing you to the ground, and they bring out a saw, and they start trying to saw off your limbs. Even then, have no ill will or animosity in your heart. So, when I look out into the world, and oftentimes it's through the internet these days, because, the double-edged blade that is, people say oftentimes the inside thoughts because they have the anonymity of being online. Many of the people sharing these thoughts could be the kind of person that if you saw them on the street, you would have never guessed it came from them. But the very fact that they revealed that about themselves can be, I think, important. It can be important to take those examples and use them to investigate your own mind. How seriously do you take the Buddha's encouragement to develop goodwill? Have you developed it to the point that it is universal? Have you developed it to the point that it is expansive? When we develop goodwill and we send it out in all directions, outward into infinity, is this something that you truly feel, you can claim to have in your heart and in your mind? And if the answer is no, that's fine. That just means you're human. But it means that you have work to do. I have work to do, and you have work to do in that regard. To continue expanding our heart limitlessly, and to protect it, to protect the goodwill that we're cultivating. The Buddha's example is actually quite timely for this time of year. We're coming up on Christmas, and one of the images we have is the Virgin Mary holding her child, Jesus, right? And it's the image of the mother and child. In Buddhism, we also have that imagery in regard to goodwill, that we protect our goodwill as we would protect our only son. So, one of the ways that we can protect our goodwill is by nurturing it, by feeding it. And we can start small. We can start with ourselves, and we can start with the little lives around us. There's always little lives. Even right now, little critters. You might not see it because it's winter time. But sometimes if you sit here in the summer, little creepy crawlies like to come in through these tatami mats, right? And it can take a lot of patience to let them kind of crawl over you while you're meditating. There's a lot of really good stories like that, by the way, in various Buddhist traditions. One of my favorite stories is the Thai forest monk Ajahn Lee Dhammadaro, who would make a game out of this. He'd find some place to meditate, and it'd be covered in like red fire ants and everything, and he'd just put his little mat down and go, okay, I'm going to meditate here, and all right, ants, I'm going to extend my goodwill to you, and you're going to leave me alone, and I'm going to leave you alone. And he'd sit down with other meditators, and they'd get all eaten up, and he wouldn't. And he'd go, ha-ha, success, see the power of goodwill? And I love those kind of stories, because it's, it's how cheeky Ajahn Lee to be throwing his goodwill around like that. It's like, see what you can do with goodwill? It's like a superpower. And it sounds outlandish. It kind of sounds like it's a made-up story, but I've actually seen people who've cultivated this, who may not even necessarily be Buddhist. I had a friend many, many years ago who was kind of a lapsed Christian, and he was very, very fearful of bees in particular. He had a phobia of bees, in the same way that this woman has her arachnophobia. I don't know what the corresponding cool Greek name for that is, but he had a phobia of bees. And what he decided to do is make a pact with the bees. He said, bees, for the rest of my life, I will never, ever, ever harm a bee. So please leave me the hell alone. And I'll extend it further. No insect, no bug, no spider, no creepy crawly. I won't kill a single one. And in return, please, 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 never sting me. And in the entire time since he had made that, up until the time I saw him last, that had stuck. He had not gotten stung at any point since he made that promise, that pact. And oftentimes that's what goodwill can look like. It doesn't mean that you're friendly. It doesn't mean that you're best friends. You just harbor no ill will. Quite the opposite. Goodwill for their welfare, for the welfare of all beings. And these are promises that we can make and promises that we can maintain. And if we can do it for the bees, and we can do it for the spiders, and we can do it for the creepy crawlies, even if it's inconvenient, we can extend it to people, we can extend it to beings of all types, outward towards infinity. So that would be my encouragement. You know, we live in the West where we're kind of bombarded right now with Christmas. Freaking Mariah Carey, huh? You know? But this is a time when people often say, joy to the world, peace on earth, goodwill towards all men. Okay, well, we're Buddhists cultivating the path, right? We can actually do something about that because the Buddha gave us a way to do exactly that. To cultivate peace, to cultivate goodwill towards all, right? And it's not about being okay with terrible people. It's about not wishing ill will on terrible people, because that's not how terrible people become unterrible. That just creates more terrible people. So that would be my message as we go into this Christmas season as Buddhists in the West. Let's go forward and cultivate peace and well-being, goodwill in our hearts, and spread it around in whatever little ways we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Subodha. If you have any question, you can ask, or any comment.
Don't worry, this is not a classroom. I'm not going to pick on you. But the question can be about anything.
Well, I have you talk about, thank you for the talk too. You talk about the killing bugs thing, and it's remind me, so the story 1 month giving advice, but I want to ask you, if you live in the house and with full of bugs, and inspection comes and they say, you have to get rid of this one. So, and then what can you do? By the law, you live with by law, you have to kill the bug. But as the way you are Buddhist, you don't want to kill the bug. But what can you do? What do you think?
You know, the thing is, I've never been in that exact situation where the city's telling me, you got to kill these guys. I think in that case, realistically, in those situations, we do the best we can, right? So what it means is that you might tell them, look, I'm not going to get in your way, but I'm not going to help with the situation, right? You do whatever you think is best, and I'm going to do whatever I think is best. And if they decide to go in there and fumigate or something, that's on them. That's their karma. That's not your karma, right? So one of the issues that I think comes up when we discuss non-ill will and non-violence is that we think that we have to jump in the way all the time, right? Like we have to put ourselves in danger, we have to put ourselves in these crazy situations. And I think realistically sometimes we can, and sometimes we should. And other times people are going to do what they're going to do, We don't have to encourage them. We don't have to participate in what they're doing. Now, this might seem like a weird stepping around the question, but I've seen this come up in different ways where really there's not a whole lot you can do and people are going to act otherwise. For a long time, I was working with people who were training to be chaplains. And one of the big conversations for a lot of chaplains, not just Buddhist chaplains, but all chaplains, was the issue of euthanasia, right? People who are dying, they're ill with something, and they don't want to continue living, and they want to end their lives sooner, right? And one of the debates is that there are places where this is legal, and the patient can do this, and they can talk to the doctor, and they ask the chaplain, well, are you going to approve of this, right? And it's not that the chaplain gets to make the choice, it's that does the chaplain approve? And the thing is that a lot of chaplains don't approve. Plenty do as well. But there are plenty of times where the chaplain has to say, well, I'm not going to encourage this, but if you make this choice, I'll be there alongside you, I'll support you, but I'm not encouraging this action. Because for a Buddhist, you can't encourage someone to end their own life. That's a violation of the precept. And that is an act of negative karma to encourage someone to kill themselves, even in that situation. And there are people in Buddhist chaplaincy who try to argue this way and that way about how to go about it and say, like, no, actually, you can encourage it. You can't say, yes, this is a good thing to do. But there are plenty of other Buddhists who look over the texts, the tradition, and reflect on their own conduct and how this would actually work out in the world and say, I can't in good conscience encourage this as a medical practice. But if people do it, that's their choice, right? And I'll still be a chaplain, but I don't have to encourage the behavior. And so oftentimes when we live in an apartment, we live in a townhome, we live in something, we like to think we own it until the city, the county, the country reminds us we don't actually own anything. And what they decide to do is what they decide to do. But so long as you're not the one killing anything, you have not broken the precepts, right? That's on them. They chose to do that stuff. You didn't choose it and you didn't do it. If you have a way of stopping it, good, try. But if you have no recourse, literally no way of stopping it, do the best you can. And do so with a clean conscience. You didn't kill and you didn't encourage killing. That's the best we can do in certain situations. And again, those are very extreme situations, both the one that you brought up and also the chaplain dealing with euthanasia. Those are both extreme cases where really there might not be any choice you can make. And in that case, you do what you do your best.
Okay, so
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say, this is a reference to not human beings, but
Yeah.
to bugs. The other thing you can do is, I can remember Reverend Rubin would always say, wish them a better rebirth.
Well, do that anyway.
Wish the bugs that are killed a better rebirth.
Yeah. Which I would say you should do that anyway.
resolution.
I can't imagine it's all that great being a moth, especially around my dad. Anything else?
Subodha, does the same thing apply to an older pet? So we've got a 14-and-a-half-year-old dog, starting to go downhill, starting to suffer. As a Buddhist, we should not put him down.
See, that's another tough one, So the thing is, I have never made that choice. I grew up in the kind of household where, we barely took pets to the vet anyway, right? In Latin culture, your dog lives in your backyard, it eats table scraps. It's probably more familiar with beans and tortillas than it is with dog chow, At least my grandparents' dogs are. And so they just tend to kind of pass mysteriously. It's like they got old and now they're dead, and then you bury them or whatever, right? And it's only as I've been around my wife and her family, who are Americans of mostly Irish descent, where all of a sudden we're going to the vets and finding out that pets are sick. Like, oh wow, you can find out, weird. And there was I've seen it now twice where the doctor has encouraged, like the vet has encouraged, putting the pet down. And one of the times I saw it, it was with my mother-in-law's cat, and she made that choice. And then another time it was my wife's cat, and then also mine through marriage, cat, and my wife decided to go with the doctor's decision on that because it was believed to be more humane. And truthfully, I don't actually know if it's really more humane, because I've also seen it around the other side, and pets tend to live until they don't, just the same way humans tend to live until they don't in places where there isn't a lot of medicine or doctors around. So I've seen it. I've even seen my wife hold a cat as they do the whole thing, and you see the life kind of drain out of it. And the vet says it's more humane, but in those moments it really doesn't feel like it to me. I would say that if it had been my choice, I would have said no, and I guess it's up to debate which one of us is the more humane. I've seen pets die naturally, and I've seen them die like that, and they're both pretty awful. So, in your own case, you'll have to, once you reach that moment, hear the same thing from the vet, who's going to tell you it's the more humane thing to do, and I don't know. I'm not sure I believe them, but plenty of people have made that choice, and you'll make that choice too. And just like everyone around me seems to make that choice. It's not one I've made, but I don't think I would. Like I would choose to put them down. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, the vets are starting to talk about that. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is let's just keep the little guy comfortable.
Yeah.
As much as we can.
And one of my family's most beloved dogs was that way. We kept him around. We kept him comfy. As he got older, he was like a little more incontinent, so he started having more accidents, and so it meant more cleaning and everything. But we kept him warm. We kept him comfy, and he was very relaxed and seemed happy until one morning we woke up and he was gone. And you pair that, like contrast that to when my wife had our cat put down, and you just kind of see the whole thing happen, and I don't know. They're both bad. They're both bad. That's one of the reasons why we cultivate this path, is to deal with this whole issue of death. The Buddha was looking for a happiness that was unborn and undying, and that's why, because he saw that happiness that is in this cyclic existence is mostly marked by old age, illness, and death. And it can affect our pets too, and when we see that and have to be around that, it's awful, regardless of which choice we make. So I feel for you. I also have a neighbor right now who has a very elderly dog that, we live on the second story, and so we have to see this poor guy try to get down the steps for his daily walks, and he's starting to slip a little and everything, and I can only imagine what choice my neighbor will have to contend with soon.
Totally.
Yeah.
I've got to deal with spiders, like your friend has to deal with these, very scared of spiders. And I did make that deal where...
Good job, sweetheart. Good job.
Yes, but Jimmy's dad is. And since I've made that deal, I can take a piece of paper and hold it up to the spider. It gently crawls on and stays there until I get outside. It is strange.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It is.
Yeah.
No, I've
And if they don't, I just ask Vivi to take care of it.
Yeah, I've weirdly had a lot of success with that too. Like I can't even remember the last time I got a mosquito bite even. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird.
Mm-hmm. It's okay. A lot of people get mosquito bites. They're awful, aren't they? Yeah.
All right. I think we have a good topic to talk. I just want to say a few things about that one. I think I have more experience about the spider and mosquitoes because back in our countries, lot of. You cannot wait even sometime around 5, 6 o'clock evening time. The mosquitoes coming, biting. Oh my goodness. So one time I have a good friend living in this house in our center. So he visit with me in Sri Lanka. So he's practicing the five precepts. So when we are traveling in Sri Lanka, we have to stay one place, small hotel, motel, and there are no air condition. Only they have fan, ceiling fans, and there are a lot of mosquito coming to the room because the rain, because of the plant. There are a lot of all kind of mosquitoes. So what this guy doing? He's saying, Bhante, I cannot kill any mosquitoes, and I'm going to take all the mosquitoes from my room to outside. Got the glass, drinking water glass, without water. He catch the one mosquito and he cover his hand and go outside, open the door and leave outside, come back again to room. So when he opened the door, maybe another 5, 10 mosquitoes come. So he was whole night, did not sleep, doing same thing, catch the mosquito one by one. I told him, just put the fan little very fast, then they don't come to your body area, And no, I don't want to make a disturb to them. I said, well, you have choice. Either you have to sleep or you catch the mosquito and keep outside. So whole night he was doing like that. I was sleeping next room. I don't have any trouble. Next day, we are another place. Same problem he had, mosquitoes, because that area, a lot of mosquitoes. I told, he learned something the other night, and that night he put the fan very high and he sleep. So the mosquitoes, spiders, we have a lot of in our countries. Any countries, tropical countries. I think Mr. Nam have a lot of experience also back in Vietnam. So we are not scared about the spider, no way. And the mosquito, a little bit problem mosquito. When even mosquitoes biting, automatically you don't know. Sometimes, it's happened to me also, I have to say. I don't want to lie, going like that. Sometimes we say, okay, like this. But sometimes it's going. And I remember one time Karna was with me in Sri Lanka. My goodness. She want to come outside, sometime, go around the temple land. And there are a lot of mosquitoes because there are a lot of plant, bushes. That area has the most mosquitoes. She said, Rami Shanti, I cannot stay. Mosquito is biting me. I said, go inside. She doesn't want to go inside. So anyway, thank you, Subodha, for that good talk today. And we will chant the page 4 and page 10. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranam gacchami, Dhammam saranam gacchami, Sangham saranam gacchami. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them all. Deluding passions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them all. Dharma gates are limitless.
embody them all. Buddha's ways supreme, I vow to attain it. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and the sick find health relief.
Thank you again, everybody. And we have tea and cookies. So next Sunday, I believe 22nd, that's the Anand Coronado is going to speak. He speak English and Spanish both. So please come and join. In case you have some Spanish speaking people, please bring here. 22nd, he's going to give a Dhamma talk. And the last Sunday of this year, which is 29, we're going to do the special blessing for the new year. Please come and join. Ratan Sara is going to lead the blessing for new year. So thank you again for everybody. By the power of the Buddha, Dhamma and the Sangha, you will be well and happy.
Sadhu.